So as we get into the first segment of the federal aviation regulations, mainly take a look at Part 61 operations today. Part 61 dealing with certification of pilots and flight instructors. We'll be looking at it from the certification of pilots perspective here. And more importantly, as a commercial pilot, what can you legally do to be compensated and hired? In other words, not run an illegal air taxi operation, which the FAA is very much are aggressively pursuing, let's put it that way, the illegal air taxi operations that are occurring in the U.S. They're doing that for safety reasons, but also for economic reasons. So when we take a peek later in the lecture on that we'll have a much better understanding of what you can do and cannot do. And that was really the whole point of those 15 readings, case laws, legal interpretations, legal enforcements that you read that help you understand what is this world of commercial aviation. Yes, I can get paid to fly, but how do I not get sidelined by the FAA with an enforcement action for illegal air taxi operation? All right, so as we get into our lesson today, I'm going to kill the attendance. We're going to kind of go a little bit segment by segment through certain parts of Part 61 regulations. We'll introduce a couple other regs for you for some other parts that are pertinent to commercial pilots. We're going to start off with just certification and have a quick chat about aircraft and airman certification. And when we look at okay, here's a discussion post if you need to put questions or comments in there. When we look at aircraft certification, we have an aircraft that was certified in relation to what its intended use is for. And so when we look across the categories, these are not all of them, but these are the more common ones for you. There's still a few more out there. You're used to flying the Cirrus SR-20. That's a normal category aircraft. And we look at that normal category aircraft as intending just to be for general use. There is a maximum amount of weight for it, 12,500 pounds. Anything that's over 12,500 pounds would be considered a large airplane. Maximum of 9 seats, that would include the pilot seat, and it has a maximum bank angle of 60 degrees. Well, in other words, you need to limit yourself to no more than 60 degrees of bank in that airplane. So that's intended just for normal operations, nothing special about it. You want to do some typical maneuvers or go from point A to point B, and that's what normal aircraft category is all about. Now, there's some other ones there. Some of these are very particular because you're going to be tested on the knowledge exam over different categories of aircraft here. So just helping you understand. The next one's called utility category. And it's pretty much a special purpose category. And there are different examples of aircraft in the utility category. But one example that you'll be able to understand is a lot of bush flying aircraft are in the utility category. They're kind of made with a purpose to probably carry a load of supplies or people into rough terrain. So they need kind of a short takeoff and landing capability, the ability to climb quickly. So there's a certain utility or use for them. Very similar, the limitations with this one, with the exception that you are allowed to do more than a 60-degree bank angle. In other words, you can do spins in these type of aircraft. Limited aerobatics. Probably a loop, barrel roll, Spin would be the extent of what you could do in these type of airplanes. You want to go and do full-on aerobatics, you need an aerobatic category aircraft. So our Super Decathlon is the example for you. And hopefully you'll get the opportunity to fly that a little bit later when you are in the commercial course. When you're doing your initial commercial flight training, whether it's the single engine or the multi-engine, you'll have an opportunity for upset attitude training, including spin recovery. So it's a great trip in the airplane. So hopefully you'll be able to do that. Next, you're not tested on the commuter category, but just throwing it in there so you understand that there are transport size aircraft made to carry a number of people. So the maximum of 19 passenger seats. So it's not including the crew, but 19 passenger seats. It does have a maximum weight of 19,000 pounds as well. You don't see these used that often in our airline industry, in the typical areas that we fly in, but they are certainly used in the commercial world, especially small hops between small airports where there's a small segment of people that need to be transported. Then we move up into the transport category. These aircraft are designed to carry a lot of people from point A to point B. So they have large class and heavy classification transport category aircraft. So, you know, our Boeing 737 on the ramp is an example of the transport category of a heavy, not a heavy, but a large jet rather. The next two are certainly tested in the knowledge test bank: restricted aircraft and experimental aircraft. Restricted means there's probably usually one specific operation for that aircraft, and that's all it's meant to do. So the crop duster is a good example of the restricted category. You don't transport people or cargo in it. You don't really do flight training in it. You do aerial application in it. Right? So the requirements in there for it to be used for commercial operations would be no passengers and no cargo in there. So that's a big one right there. So that is an FAA test question right there. Some other interesting things: you can't fly these over densely populated areas or through congested airways or busy terminal airports. So they not only do they have restricted to what they're used for, but where they can go. Experimental aircraft, these are your home built ones. They have to be at least 51% built by the person who buys it. It would be considered a home built aircraft. So you could actually get a kit that's been 49% assembled, and then you assemble 51% of it, right? Or you can just go from scratch and you can form all your parts and you can make your own aircraft for sure. You are not allowed to have any passengers or cargo for hire in an experimental aircraft. There is very limited flight training opportunities in experimental aircraft. They wouldn't put these aircraft on the flight training line. So you can do some flight training, but it's very limited what you can do in it. Another interesting thing, they are VFR day only. They can get waivers for nighttime and for instrument. That is possible, but that's a waiver. And they always have to notify the tower that they are an experimental aircraft. And you'll hear that in the call sign. So just call up Battle Creek Tower, experimental 12 Charlie Foxtrot, inbound 10 West. And you'll hear that continuously in their call sign. So that's an aircraft certification. What is the aircraft intended to do, really? Next bit comes to airmen certification categories. And this relates to what are you trained to fly? So starting off with the different aircraft categories. Aircraft is any device with the intention of flight. And specifically, we've broken aircraft down into different categories. And it's really based upon three things, if you're curious. I'm not going to test you over these three. But they determine the category based upon, first, how is lift produced with the aircraft? Whether it's a wing, a rotating wing, such as a rotor, lighter than air, how does it produce lift? The second one is, how is the aircraft propelled through the air? You know, an airplane uses an engine, helicopter uses the rotating wing, glider uses gravity to move through the air. And the third thing for categories is, how is the aircraft controlled? Airplane has the elevator, rudder, aileron system. Helicopter tilts the rotating wing. Lighter than air, they have a combination of elevator and rudder controls. So these are the 7 categories that we have currently. They may add some as technologies develop. These are the current ones that we have. Now, in addition to you being trained to fly one of these categories, there may be additional, what we call class ratings for them. Some of the aircraft categories have additional class ratings and others do not. The airplane certainly does. And it's based upon number of engines and whether its operating surface is water or hard surface. So we get the single engine class rating, multi-engine class rating, and we get either sea or land class ratings. So if you pull out your private pilot certificate, looking on the back, it will have airplane, single engine, land on it. Now, some aircraft, in addition to this class rating, have a certain complexity about them that requires a type rating. 3 criteria exist, and if you meet any one of those criteria, then you have to get the type rating. So first, anything that's considered a large aircraft or bigger. So that's over 12,500 pounds. So that automatically requires a type rating. It does exclude lighter than air aircraft though. Turbojet powered, talking about jet engine airplanes. Keep in mind the 2 terms that you'll likely see is turbojet or turbofan. Older style engines are turbojet. A lot of military style engines are turbojet or fast fighter aircraft. A lot of your airlines use turbofan. There are some aircraft that have the turbine engine moving a propeller. That's a turboprop. That's not included here. And then the last criteria is if the FAA administrator deems it necessary that the aircraft have a type rating. Yes. Turbofan, yes. So an example of another aircraft that requires a type rating is the Mitsubishi MU-2 aircraft. It's just a high wing, piston powered twin engine with a horrible safety record. So the FAA has determined that that aircraft, even though it's not large, it's not turbine powered, it does need a type rating.
What's it called?
Mitsubishi MU-2. Once you see it, it'll be unforgettable airplane. So the example aircraft here, we have an airplane, multi-engine land. The type rating required is a Boeing 727 on it. Looking at another perspective of commercial aviation is becoming a commercial lighter than air pilot. So let's understand lighter than air aircraft. So there really are two class ratings here. First, we have the airship design, whether that is the rigid airship. Think about the Hindenburg, which was a rigid airship. It's got a steel structure or aluminum structure inside of it. And then a blimp design, like the old Goodyear airships flying around. The old ones were considered a blimp, meaning there's just some gas bags surrounded by an envelope. No internal structure up there. If you're interested in the Goodyear airships, the new ones are semi-rigid. So they have part of a structure up there. Balloon is also a lighter than air aircraft, so it's a different class rating. And if you want to become a airship commercial pilot or lighter than air, you have to have a total of 200 hours of aircraft time. That aircraft time would only include 50 hours in the actual airship itself. And then there's a few other interesting things that you would need. Cross countries are only 25 nautical miles in these critters. They don't go very fast. I think Goodyear blimps are typically go up to about 30 knots on it, so they're not very fast. It's like going from here to like just past Coldwater as a cross country in an airship. So interestingly enough, in order to become an airship pilot, you can't rent them anywhere. Right? There's no FBOs that have instructors for you to train you, and there's no aircraft to rent, no blimps or airships to rent. So the only way you can actually become that commercial airship pilot is to get hired at a company that flies airships. So that means you would have to become a commercial pilot, either airplane or rotorcraft, and then they would train you the remaining 50 hours and bring in the pilot examiner for a check ride. And then you would be a commercial airship pilot. So we look at companies, Goodyear, Fujifilm, MetLife are some of the ones that you typically see. It makes for a great platform for camera crews at sporting events. Right? Goodyear even does tours where they have them based at, so you can go on an hour-long tour in one of these. Other companies are trying to develop these into cargo transports, so that's certainly future related. Okay, moving into different part of the regs, looking at aircraft documents that are required. A variety of aircraft documents that you certainly do need, right? Starting with the FAA airworthiness certificate. So hopefully you read in plain sense all about the airworthiness certificate. A lot of people really don't understand what this piece of paper is. And the airworthiness certificate is just an FAA authorization to operate an aircraft in flight. Simple as that. It doesn't get any easier. This piece of paper is from the FAA that says you are allowed to fly this aircraft. They do put some conditions on that as to when it's valid for flight. Remember, you just can't make your own aircraft and fly it, because the FAA has control of the sky in terms of rules. And they specify that aircraft of certain dimensions or size or weights must have an airworthiness certificate. So if you do design your own aircraft, you can do that. You just have to then show the FAA that you built it in accordance to the regulations, and they could issue you an airworthiness certificate. They can issue you permission to fly that aircraft in flight. Keep that in mind. You might want to read up about the story of the balloon chair pilot from the late 70s in the Los Angeles area. This guy decided he was going to take his lawn chair and attach helium weather balloons to it and go up a couple hundred feet and, enjoy the view and then come back down. And his method of control for coming back down was his BB gun to shoot the balloons. And shoot enough balloons and come back down again. He wasn't an engineer. He didn't do any calculations. He didn't know what the lifting capability was of helium. And he attached a certain number of helium balloons to his lawn chair. And when he untethered it, he launched up and reached 14,000 feet. This is Los Angeles, all right, Class B airspace. And so airliners are now reporting this balloon chair pilot. And it's interfering with traffic, obviously. So, and his method for descent control worked. He shot out enough balloons, came back down. Of course, the FAA was not pleased that an aircraft flew in restricted airspace or Bravo airspace without an airworthiness certificate. Right. So, if you want to read up more on how that story panned out, you can search that up online. The aircraft airworthiness certificate in your CIRS is a standard airplane or standard airworthiness certificate. There's also something called a special certificate. Let's talk about that standard airworthiness certificate. It is issued by the FAA when the aircraft meets FAA requirements for its construction and is in a safe condition to operate. So if you do build an airplane, you just show the FAA that you followed all the applicable FARs for constructing it, and you show that it is in a safe condition for flight. Everything's working on the airplane. They then give you a airworthiness certificate. Again, that's just your authorization from the FAA that allows you to conduct flight. This certificate does transfer with the aircraft if you were to sell the airplane or give it away. Question?
This movie, kind of like a documentary that the Canadian FAA version made about this one guy who said he made something better than the F-18 and he made like a push prop plane
Okay.
and out of Cessna wings, and who's, I'm trying to remember the movie name. It's like the Defender or something, or the Invader. But look it up. But it's funny.
That'd be interesting to see. Yeah. Now, when is this thing valid? And this is the big thing on it. Remember, that piece of paper does not state that the aircraft is airworthy. And that's where a lot of confusion comes from students. An airworthiness certificate does not state that an aircraft is airworthy. Airworthiness certificate is just the authorization from the FAA to conduct flight. It is valid for flight for that permission from the FAA as long as the aircraft is maintained and registered in the US. So if you maintain your aircraft and you have the registration up to date, then you have a valid airworthiness certificate. So you have approval from the FAA to conduct flight. What does maintained mean? Just kind of group that, use that word maintained, and we're looking at all required inspections are done. We'll talk about those later in the course. Maintenance items are addressed. So that means if something's broken, it's been properly addressed on the aircraft, whether that's required equipment or optional equipment. Preventive maintenance has been conducted on the aircraft. An oil change is preventive maintenance. Making sure the tires are full of air is preventive maintenance. Any alterations done are done in accordance with what is required to be done on that. Okay? And any sort of AD, airworthiness directive compliance. All those mean maintained. As long as those things are done to the aircraft and you're registered, then you have a valid airworthiness certificate. What happens if my airplane has broken equipment on it, or I missed a required inspection? Then you're not, or you no longer have a valid airworthiness certificate. If you miss an inspection, your certificate is not valid for flight. You don't have permission anymore from the FAA to conduct flight. That means you have to then obtain a special flight permit. It would typically be addressed as a ferry permit, because you want to ferry the aircraft to a location to conduct the maintenance or the maintenance inspection. So part of the extra credit opportunity was completing the required application for airworthiness certificate. So we have an example here. These airworthiness certificates are valid for one trip. You're trying to fly it to a certain airport for maintenance purposes. It's valid to get to that airport only. There's other reasons there, but we don't really care about them. Special flight permit, that's something you have to know on your check ride. To keep that in mind, it says right in the ACS that you have the knowledge of how to obtain a special flight permit. And everything is done with a application. So you must complete the FAA application for airworthiness certificate. Certain boxes you have to tick mark on that, explain the reason for the aircraft not being airworthy, what's the itinerary, what airports, what you have to land at in between your final destination, and who would be required crew members on that. Remember, the FAA doesn't do anything with the phone call. You just can't call them up and say, I got a broken airplane, can I fly it? Now, they need the paperwork, they need the application to go along with it. In addition to that, the FAA will want to know if the aircraft is safe for flight. We know it's not airworthy for flight at the moment, but is it safe for flight? And that needs a mechanic to look it over. Yes.
We're gonna get into how to, or where to apply for this, right?
No,
No.
no.
Alright.
It goes to the FSDO
Uh,
for approval. All right, next certificate is registration. Now, it used to be valid for 3 years. The FAA has made some changes, or are in the process of making changes for 7-year registrations. That is something that's just a recent change on here. The registration is valid for the time period indicated unless it's been canceled by the owner, aircraft's destroyed, ownership is transferred, or the owner's died and 30 days have passed. If you sell the aircraft, you have to apply for a new registration. FAA approved airplane flight manual, another required document. AFM, okay, it's called the Airplane Flight Manual. It's approved. We know it's approved because when we look at it, the aircraft serial number and registration number also has the FAA signature along with it. This is the one that's inside the aircraft itself. you perhaps have a copy of this book, a generic copy of it, not the specific one for the aircraft. You have a generic fleet one, and something that's generic for a fleet would be an information manual or a pilot's operating handbook.